Marcus Chen stood at the door of little Sophie's classroom, 7 years old, and felt his stomach drop. Her daughter was kneeling on the floor, wiping up spilled paint with paper towels while other children played around her. The teacher, Mrs. Whitmore, watched with her arms crossed, a barely concealed look of satisfaction on her face. "Sophie always makes a mess," the teacher said loudly to another child. "That's why she needs to learn to clean up her own messes." Marcus had left the heart surgery he was performing early, something rare for one of Central Hospital's most respected neurosurgeons, because Sophie had called crying during the break. "Daddy, the teacher said kids like me don't deserve to be here." He had thought his daughter was exaggerating. Children sometimes misinterpret situations, but there, seeing that scene, he realized that Sophie had minimized reality. "Dr. Chen," Mrs. Whitmore's voice sounded sharp when she finally noticed him. "We didn't expect it. I mean, what a surprise." Sophie looked up, her face stained with tears and blue paint. "Daddy." Marcus entered the room with measured steps, that surgical calm that his residents knew well, the same tranquility that preceded his most precise decisions. "Mrs. Whitmore, could you explain why my daughter is on the floor while the other children are playing?" "Well, she spilled the paint," replied the teacher, straightening her shoulders. "I teach my students responsibility. They all need to clean up their own messes." Marcus looked around. There was paint on the tables, on other children's aprons, even on the walls. Interesting. And who cleaned that paint in the corner, or that stain on the wall? The teacher blinked quickly. "Well, that was different. Accidents happen. Accidents." Marcus repeated the words slowly, watching as Mrs. Whitmore's face began to redden. At 42, he had faced prejudice in operating rooms, medical boards, international conferences. "I recognized the signs." He bent down beside Sophie, gently wiping the paint from her daughter's face with a tissue. "Honey, go wash your hands in the bathroom. Daddy needs to talk to Mrs. Whitmore." When Sophie left, Marcus slowly stood up. The teacher was already instinctively backing away, that defensive body language of someone who knows they've crossed a line. "Dr. Chen, I think there was a misunderstanding." "Was there?" Marcus kept his voice low, almost gentle. "Because when I called yesterday asking about Sophie's sudden low grades in all her subjects, you told me that she was having a hard time adjusting. When I asked about her not being chosen for any class presentations, you said that other kids were more participatory. And now I find her on her knees on the floor, cleaning up by herself while you supervise like, what exactly?" "I treat all students equally." Mrs. Whitmore's voice rose an octave. "Of course." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on her with that intensity that made nervous inmates tremble. "Then you'll have no problem showing me the class's discipline records. I want to see how many times other kids have been punished for spilling materials, how many times they've been left out of group activities, how many times they've had their grades inexplicably lowered." The teacher opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. "Don't worry," Marcus continued, that calm tone still in place. "I've already officially requested all records this morning. I've also scheduled a meeting with Principal Harrison for Monday. And, Ms. Whitmore," he paused, watching the growing panic in her eyes, "I'm going to bring some guests to our conversation, people who are very interested in how the educational system treats certain children differently." What Mrs. Whitmore didn't know was that Marcus had begun systematically documenting every suspicious interaction over the past 3 weeks. Every negative note Sophie brought home, every school assignment with surprisingly low grades for a child reading 2 years above grade level. Each time Sophie came home saying she didn't get picked again, he had thought he was being paranoid, an overprotective father seeing problems where none existed. But then Sophie had called, crying, and something about that call, the desperation in her little girl's voice, had awakened something deep. Marcus left the room with Sophie, her small hand held in his. In the hallway, he bent down to her level again. "Sophie, remember when you told me that the teacher spoke differently to you than to the other kids?" Sophie nodded, biting her lip. "I need you to be really brave and tell me everything, every single thing that happened. Can you do that for me? Are you going to take me out of school?" Her voice, and she was so small, so scared. "No, dear." Marcus smiled, but there was steel in that smile. "I'll do better. I'll make sure no other child goes through what you went through. I promise." In the car, while Sophie told everything, how the teacher always chose her to demonstrate inappropriate behavior, how her work always came back with more corrections than the other children's, how she was never chosen to be a classroom assistant, Marcus recorded every word. That night, after putting Sophie to bed, he sat in his office and opened his laptop. The folder I had started 3 weeks ago now had a new title, Complete Documentation, Whitmore. I had emails, Sophie's schoolwork compared to other children's. I had Sophie's notes from when the substitute teacher covered the class for 2 weeks. All excellent. There were testimonies that other parents had cautiously shared about their own suspicions, and there was something more. something I had discovered accidentally when a fellow doctor mentioned that her daughter was also in Mrs. Whitmore's class. "My Emma loves that teacher," she had said. "Always pays extra attention to girls. Certain girls." Marcus had started connecting dots. Standards. 3 non-white families had moved their children out of that class within the last year. The administration had filed the complaints as differences in educational style. But while everyone thought they saw a worried father being reassured by the system, Marcus Chen had done what he did best: precision surgery. Only this time, it wasn't a heart he was mending. What Mrs. Whitmore didn't know, what no one at that school knew, was that Marcus wasn't just documenting for a school meeting. He was building something much bigger, much more permanent. And every time the teacher had underestimated that overprotective Asian father, she had dug a deeper hole. As Marcus closed his laptop and looked at the photo of Sophie on his desk, his brilliant, creative, kind girl, he felt that cold, clear determination that only comes when you know, with absolute certainty, that you're on the right side of history. If you're enjoying this story of a father who turned humiliation into an unforgettable lesson in justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The email Marcus began writing that night would have consequences that no one at that school could have imagined. But that, everyone would find out very soon. Marcus spent the weekend listening to Sophie. Not just listening, documenting every word, every detail, every tear her daughter had held back for months. "Dad, she always chooses me when she needs to show her what not to do," Sophie explained on Saturday morning, picking at the Legos scattered across the floor. "Like, if someone doesn't raise their hand right, she'll say, 'Sophie, show me how not to do it.' But when it comes to showing them the right way, she never chooses me." Marcus was typing furiously on his laptop. Every example, every pattern. "And there's more," Sophie continued, her voice getting smaller. "She always sits the other girls in the front. I sit in the back near the trash can. She said it's because I'm easily distracted, but Dad, I can see the picture better up close. My glasses don't work well from a distance." Marcus's stomach tightened. He had asked the school 3 times to move Sophie due to her mild myopia. 3 times Mrs. Whitmore had ignored it. On Monday morning, Marcus arrived at school with Sophie, but this time he didn't leave. He had canceled all non-emergency surgeries for the week, something his colleagues found alarming from someone so dedicated. "Dr. Chen, the meeting isn't until next Monday," said the secretary, surprised to see him. "I came to observe." His answer was simple, calm. "I have parental permission to be here as a medical volunteer this week, checking to see if any children need health care." It was true. Technically, he had gotten approval from the school board Friday afternoon. What he didn't mention was that he planned to spend every spare minute observing Mrs. Whitmore's office. During breaks, he talked to other children. "And do you like your teacher?" he would ask casually while checking blood pressure or temperature. "She's nice," said Emma, a blonde, blue-eyed girl. "She always lets me help distribute the papers, and when I make a mistake, she says, 'Everyone makes mistakes,' and smiles." "What about your friend Marcus?" Chen asked, pointing to a black boy waiting his turn. "Does he help too?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Whitmore says Marcus needs to learn to pay attention first, before he has responsibilities. But I think he pays attention. He always knows the answers." Marcus wrote everything down. On Tuesday, during the Rec King, 3 fathers approached him, parents who had heard rumors about his extended visit to the school. "Dr. Chen," began a mother named Patricia, looking around nervously. "My daughter Jasmine was in Mrs. Whitmore's class last year. We transferred her." "Why?" Patricia took a deep breath. Jasmine started saying she was stupid. A 7-year-old girl who was reading Harry Potter alone started calling herself stupid. It took her months of therapy to discover that her teacher had said in front of the whole class that some children are just not cut out for school. Marcus felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice controlled. "Did you file a complaint?" "I registered it. Principal Harrison said it was a misunderstanding, and that Mrs. Whitmore had 20 years of incident-free experience." Patricia grabbed his arm. "But Dr. Chen, it wasn't just us. At least 5 Black and Latino families have transferred their children from this school in the last 3 years. All from her class." 5 families, Marcus repeated slowly. "And the administration didn't see a pattern?" A father named Roberto joined the conversation. "My son Daniel is in her class now. Last week he got an A on a math test. The teacher made him retake it, said he should have cheated. He cried all night." Marcus picked up the phone. "Roberto, would you authorize Daniel to participate in an independent educational assessment at no cost to you? I have colleagues at Central Hospital who do this. Would you pay for that? Consider my investment in proper documentation." That night, while Sophie was sleeping, Marcus received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Sarah Williams, an educational psychologist and colleague at the hospital. "Marcus, I heard you're investigating a case at Lincoln High School. I want to help. Why? Because 15 years ago, my daughter was in that school, in Mrs. Whitmore's class. Sarah's voice trembled slightly. She was 7 years old and started tearing her own hair out in anxiety. It took me years to connect that to the classroom. When I finally understood and tried to do something, I was ignored. They said I was a hysterical mother, projecting my own problems onto the child. Do you have documentation? I have everything. Emails, recordings of meetings, medical reports. And Marcus, it's not just Whitmore. It's an entire system that protects her because she has connections, because she's been there for decades, because changing would mean admitting they failed dozens of children. Marcus closed his eyes. The painting was getting much bigger than I had imagined. On Wednesday, Mrs. Whitmore began to notice something wrong. Marcus Chen was always around, in the hallway, in the cafeteria, talking to parents. She saw him taking notes during recess. Dr. Chen, she approached him after lunch, trying to sound casual. I didn't know we had such a dedicated medical professional among our parents. I'm dedicated to many things, Mrs. Whitmore. Children's health, justice, proper documentation. He smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. Look, about last Friday, I think you misinterpreted. Did I misinterpret my daughter on her knees on the floor? Did I misinterpret your words about children like her? Marcus tilted his head. Interesting, because I've been audio taping it. Sophie had my Apple Watch. Emergency resource, you know, in case she needed help. Mrs. Whitmore's face lost all color. It's also interesting, Marcus continued, his voice still dangerously calm, that in the last 3 days I've spoken to 12 families. 12 families whose non-white children had similar experiences in their class. 12 families who, like me, initially thought they were being paranoid or overprotective. You can't do this, she whispered. You can't come here and interrogate my students, spy. I'm not spying. I'm here as an approved medical volunteer, offering free health services. And casual conversations with concerned parents, that's just networking. He paused. But since you mentioned it, Monday's meeting will have some extra guests. Dr. Williams, an educational psychologist, Attorney Mitchell from the Civil Rights Foundation, and maybe a Tribune journalist who has a lot of interest in patterns of discrimination in the education system. Mrs. Whitmore took a step back. Are you threatening my career? Threatening? Marcus looked genuinely surprised. Ms. Whitmore, I'm not threatening anything, just documenting facts, patterns of behavior, statistically significant differences in how you treat children from different backgrounds. Science, you know, objective data. He started to walk away, then stopped. Oh, and that recording? Where do you explain to the other teacher that these children need stricter discipline because they don't have structure at home? That one is also very well documented. Sophie wasn't the only child wearing a smartwatch that day. When Marcus got home that night, he found an email from the school administration. The meeting had been brought forward to Thursday. Urgent, the subject read. Dr. Williams called minutes later. They are scared. That's good. I don't just want to scare them, Marcus replied, looking at the organized folders in his office. Each represented a child. Each contained evidence of a pattern that could no longer be ignored. I want real change. I want to make sure no child goes through this again. Then we need to go beyond school, Sarah said. We need the district. We need to make this too big to cover up. Marcus opened his laptop and started typing an email, not to school, for the State Education Board, to the Civil Rights Commission, for the Tribune. What Mrs. Whitmore didn't understand, what the entire school administration hadn't yet understood, was that Marcus Chen wasn't looking for an excuse or a transfer for Sophie. He didn't want a silent resolution or a confidentiality agreement. He was building a case so solid, so documented, so undeniable that it would change policy, that would force mandatory training, that would create oversight mechanisms, that it would protect all the children that would come after Sophie. Because Marcus Chen understood something fundamental. He had resources, education, credibility. He had the ability to be heard in ways that many parents did not. And to squander that advantage on a quiet, individual resolution would be a betrayal of all the families who could not fight alike. On Thursday morning, when he walked into the urgent meeting with Principal Harrison, he wasn't alone. Dr. Williams was there, so does Attorney Mitchell, and 3 other parents whose stories echoed Sophie's. Director Harrison tried to control the situation. Dr. Chen, I appreciate your concern. Ms. Whitmore is a valued teacher with 2 decades of documented patterns of discriminatory treatment, Attorney Mitchell interrupted, placing a 2-inch thick folder on the table. 23 families in the last 5 years. 23 children of color who experienced unexplained drops in performance, emotional problems, or were transferred out of their class. Statistical analysis shows that the probability of this being a coincidence is less than 0.001%. Director Harrison paled. Now, Marcus continued, his voice still that surgical calm, we can solve this internally with real, measurable changes, or we can make this a public case that will benefit every child in this district. The choice is yours. As the meeting continued, Mrs. Whitmore realized, too late, that she had completely underestimated this overprotective Asian father. She had thought of Marcus as just another annoying father who needed to be pacified. What she didn't see was the neurosurgeon, the man who spent 12 hours reconstructing lives with millimeter precision, the man who understood that the most complex systems could be dismantled when you found the right pressure point. While the school administration was still processing the shock of Thursday's meeting, Marcus was already 3 steps ahead. The 2-inch folder was just the beginning. That same evening, he met with Dr. Sarah Williams in her office at Central Hospital. On the table, they spread out documents, transcribed recordings, and a detailed timeline that covered not just 5 years, but almost an entire decade. Marcus, this is so much bigger than a problematic teacher, Sarah said, pointing to the patterns in the data. Look, 2016, 3 transfers of non-white families, 2017, 4, 2018, 5. And the administration filed all complaints as pedagogical differences, because investigating would mean admitting systematic negligence, Marcus added, circling names on the whiteboard, and admitting negligence would mean legal liability. Sarah nodded slowly. We need more than data. We need recorded testimonies, families willing to speak publicly. I already have 7 confirmed families, and 12 more recitals. Marcus opened his laptop, showing a meticulously organized spreadsheet, each with complete documentation. Emails ignored by administration, disproportionate disciplinary tickets, schoolwork with inexplicably low grades when compared to those of white children. What neither Sarah nor the school knew was that Marcus had hired a private investigator on Monday, someone who specialized in education cases, who had spent the week discreetly talking to former Lincoln School employees. On Friday morning, the investigator called. Dr. Chen, you need to hear this. The recording was from the former teaching assistant who had worked with Mrs. Whitmore for 3 years. His voice shook as he spoke. She had a system. She called it appropriate standards of behavior. Basically, Black and Latino kids got lower scores on participation and behavior automatically. She said she was preparing them for the real world, that they needed to learn discipline earlier. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling nauseous. Why didn't you ever report it? I reported it. To Principal Harrison, to the pedagogical coordinator, to the district. Everyone said I was misinterpreting rigorous teaching methods. 3 months later, I was fired for cultural incompatibility. Would you sign an affidavit? There was a long pause. If it really changes something, yes. Marcus now had 9 former employees willing to testify. 9 people who had seen, documented, and tried to report what was happening. 9 voices that had been silenced by a system more interested in protecting its reputation than protecting children. On Saturday, Marcus took Sophie out for ice cream. She seemed lighter, more herself, since she knew she wouldn't be returning to that classroom. The school had temporarily moved Sophie to another class while they investigated. Daddy, why didn't Mrs. Whitmore like me? Sophie asked suddenly, her ice cream spoon still in the air. Marcus took a deep breath. How do you explain systemic racism to a 7-year-old? Sometimes, honey, people get the wrong idea about other people because of how they look. It's not about you. It was never about you. It's about something broken inside of them, like a broken bone. Yes, but a broken bone they don't want to mend. Sophie thought about it for a moment. Will you fix it, Daddy? I'm going to do everything I can so that no other child has to go through what you went through. Monday arrived with the force of a storm. The original urgent meeting had turned into an emergency school board session, scheduled for Tuesday. Marcus had guaranteed that it would be a public session, but before that, he had another stop to make. The Tribune office was as busy as ever, journalists rushing between desks, phones ringing incessantly. Marcus had scheduled with Rebecca Torres, an award-winning investigator known for her reporting on social injustice. Dr. Chen, she said, shaking his hand firmly, I read your preliminary documentation. It's too systematic to be accidental. Exactly. Marcus placed 3 additional folders on her desk. But here's what really matters. It's not just one school. I got data from 6 schools in the district. The pattern repeats itself. Teachers with long careers protected by the administration, creating hostile environments for children of color while the system looks the other way. Rebecca leafed through the documents, her eyes widening with each page. This is Pulitzer material, Dr. Chen. Why are you giving this to me now? Why not wait for the court case? Because prosecutions take years. Investigative journalism creates immediate public pressure, and public pressure forces systemic changes that courts alone never achieve. Marcus leaned forward. I want every parent in this district to know what's going on. I want every school administrator to understand that overlooking these complaints has consequences. I want real change, not just a confidentiality agreement." Rebecca smiled slowly. "You're not playing chess, Dr. Chen. You're playing three-dimensional chess. I'm a surgeon. I know exactly where to cut to make the most impact with the least collateral damage to the right people." Meanwhile, Mrs. Whitmore was having the worst week of her life. Sophie's temporary transfer had been followed by a paid administrative leave on Friday. Corporate code for, "You're being investigated and we need to get you out of the line of fire." His fellow teachers avoided his gaze in the hallways. Parents started asking questions, and on Monday morning, she received formal notice. A full district investigation into possible violations of educational equity policies. She called her private lawyer, hands shaking. "They can't do this. 22 years of impeccable teaching, and now, because of an overprotective father." "Ms. Whitmore," her lawyer interrupted, tone serious. "I've read the draft documents. This isn't an overprotective parent. It's 23 families, 9 former employees, and statistical analysis showing systematic disparities. You need to understand the gravity of the situation." On Tuesday morning, the school board room was packed. Marcus had warned management that he would bring some supporters. What he didn't mention was that there would be 53 people, 23 families whose children had suffered, 9 former employees, 4 civil rights lawyers, 3 educational psychologists, and Rebecca Torres with a photographer. Principal Harrison turned pale when she saw the crowd. Council President Mr. Morrison tried to maintain his composure. "Dr. Chen, this is irregular. Irregular is ignoring 23 formal complaints over 5 years." Marcus replied calmly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Irregular is protecting a teacher with a documented pattern of discriminatory treatment. Irregular is creating an environment where children are judged by the color of their skin rather than their intellectual ability." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "But today we're going to make it very regular, very documented, very public." Mrs. Whitmore was sitting in the back of the room, trying to make herself invisible. But when Marcus began presenting the data, charts showing stark disparities in disciplinary grades, recorded testimonies from former employees, side-by-side comparisons of schoolwork with inconsistent grades, he saw the exact moment she understood. She had completely underestimated that overprotective Asian father. He had thought he could treat Sophie like he had treated dozens of other children of color over the years. Some complaints, some angry parents, but nothing that the system couldn't suppress. What she didn't anticipate was that Marcus Chen wasn't just another worried father. He was a man with resources, education, time, and most importantly, the unwavering determination of someone who had spent his entire life proving he was as good as anyone, despite a system that constantly underestimated him. And now, as he methodically presented each piece of evidence, each testimony, each documented pattern, Mrs. Whitmore finally understood that she was not just facing a father's outrage. I was facing precision surgery being performed by a master. And the patient on the table wasn't Sophie. It was the entire system that had allowed teachers like her to operate with impunity for decades. The council president cleared his throat nervously. "Dr. Chen, what exactly are you seeking here?" Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. "Systemic change, clear zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, mandatory training, independent oversight committee, and most importantly," he paused, his eyes sweeping the room, "I want every child who enters this district to know that they will be judged by their character and ability, not the color of their skin." From the back of the room, someone started applauding, then another, and another. Within seconds, half the room was on its feet. Mrs. Whitmore rose silently and went out the side door. Nobody tried to stop her, but if she thought simply disappearing would solve the problem, she was about to learn that Marcus Chen wasn't planning revenge. He planned justice. And true justice doesn't end when the guilty party leaves the room. It ends when the system that protected them is completely rebuilt to ensure it can never happen again. Tuesday's school board session was just the beginning. What happened over the next 72 hours completely transformed the city's educational landscape. On Wednesday morning, Rebecca Torres's report took over the entire page of the Tribune. The title in bold letters, "Two-Sided System, How Public Schools Have Protected from Discrimination for Decades." The matter spared no one. Photographs of internal documents showed emails between administrators discussing how to minimize complaints from parents of color. Detailed graphs revealed statistical disparities that were impossible to ignore. And at the center of it all, 23 faces, 23 children whose stories have been silenced until now. Director Harrison's phone rang nonstop. First it was the district superintendent, then 3 members of the city council. At 10 a.m., there were journalists camped in front of Lincoln School, but Marcus was just warming up. That same morning, he formally filed a class action lawsuit in federal court, not just against Ms. Whitmore, against the entire school district for systematic neglect to protect students from hostile educational environments based on race. This is not about a bad teacher, Attorney Mitchell told reporters. It's about a system that chose reputation over children. Ms. Whitmore watched the press conference from her living room. His hands were shaking, 22 years of a career falling apart in real time on television. His phone vibrated. Message from Union President. I'm sorry, Margaret. The evidence is indefensible. On Thursday, 3 bombs exploded simultaneously. The State Civil Rights Commission announced investment formal district-wide connection. The Federal Department of Education reported a possible loss of $47 million in funding, and 4 other teachers with similar standards took emergency medical leave. Marcus observed everything from the central hospital, between surgeries. Each update was more satisfying than the last. Dr. Chen, Superintendent Richards, has just resigned, his assistant announced at 3 p.m. Expected, Marcus replied calmly. He was the one filing the complaints. What surprised even Marcus was Friday. The National Association of Educators issued a statement specifically condemning the Lincoln School's practices. They used the case as an example in new national guidance on identifying and preventing racial bias in educational settings. Marcus Chen had turned Sophie's suffering into national policy. The most satisfying moment came when Mrs. Whitmore asked to meet with him. In the cafe, she looked like she had aged 10 years in a week. Eyes swollen, hands shaking. Nothing was left of that confident teacher who watched Sophie clean paint from the floor. Dr. Chen, I wanted to apologize. Voice hoarse. Marcus just watched. I never thought of myself as someone who did those things. Tears flowed. I truly believed I was maintaining standards. Standards? Marcus interrupted softly. Sophie reads 3 years above grade level, but in her class, she started calling herself stupid. She started pulling out her hair in anxiety. The teacher sobbed. You did this because you looked at my 7-year-old daughter and decided, based solely on the color of her skin, that she was less capable. I know, she whispered. What if I could go back? But you can't. Marcus's voice had steel. You can't give back the trust Sophie lost. He paused deliberately. But you know what you can do? Testify, publicly, about how bias manifests itself. Attorney Mitchell is preparing mandatory training materials. It was an offer. Not redemption, but doing something constructive. I would, she said quickly. Don't do it for me, Marcus interrupted. Do it for all the next Sophies. As he stood up, she held his arm. How did you know exactly what to do? Marcus smiled sadly. Because I was that child too. The difference? I had the resources to fight when it was my turn. He paused at the door. Sophie will know that when the world underestimates you, you don't hang your head. You document, you plan, you fight, and you change the system so the next child doesn't have to go through the same thing. What Mrs. Whitmore had underestimated was that Marcus Chen understood systems. He knew exactly where to apply pressure to cause permanent change. And as she faced the consequences of years of discrimination disguised as educational standards, she finally understood. She wasn't just facing outrage. I was facing justice carried out with surgical precision. Marcus had done more than avenge his daughter. He had performed precision surgery on a diseased system, removing infected tissue without killing the patient. Each move calculated not just to punish, but to protect hundreds of future children. As Mrs. Whitmore stood in that empty cafe, processing the magnitude of everything she had lost, Marcus was already 3 steps ahead. Because the best revenge wasn't making someone else suffer. It was building a world where what was done to you could never happen to anyone else. And he was doing just that, turning personal pain into collective protection, one precise cut at a time. 6 months later, Lincoln School was a completely different place. Marcus walked the halls during family integration night, noticing changes that seemed impossible months ago. Posters in multiple languages decorated walls, anonymous reporting system installed, and 3 educational equity supervisors roamed the school, monitoring treatment patterns. Sophie ran ahead of him, excited to show off her science project. At 8 years old, she was that bright, confident girl again, knowing that her father had fought for her. That had healed something deep. Daddy, look! Sophie pointed to a mural at the entrance showing children of all colors holding hands. Every child deserves excellence, in large, colorful letters. Director Harrison approached, visibly uncomfortable. It had narrowly survived the scandal after accepting a full audit and implementation of all reforms. Dr. Chen, all teachers will undergo mandatory unconscious bias certification. The legal case had been resolved in a historic agreement. The district would pay compensation to the 23 families and fund an ongoing supervision program. Part of it included a scholarship fund for children from marginalized communities, financed by 10 years. Mrs. Whitmore never returned to the classroom, early retirement, but she had kept her promise. Over the past 3 months, she had attended training sessions, sharing testimony about how racial bias manifested itself even in educators who considered themselves righteous. It was humiliating. Each session was a public reminder of his failure. But Marcus understood. Shame transformed into education is regenerative justice. Rebecca Torres reporting won the National Investigative Journalism Award. More importantly, it inspired investigations in 17 other districts. The case became a study in education and civil law programs. Roberto, one of the parents, approached. Dr. Chen, Daniel got an A+ in every class. And you know the best thing? He said, Dad, my new teacher really believes in me. Marcus felt that tightness in his chest. That was why. For every Daniel, every Sophie. In the parking lot, he checked email. The pilot program they developed would be expanded statewide next school year, forwarded to the Lincoln Coalition. It wasn't just about a school. It was movement. In the back seat, Sophie hummed happily. Dad, my new teacher said I should be a writer when I grow up, or a scientist, or both. Sophie thought for a moment. I think I can be anything, don't I? Because you showed that when people try to make you small, you become bigger. Marcus blinked rapidly, emotion burning. Exactly that, darling. As he drove, he reflected on the journey. It had been exhausting. Documentation, meetings, legal battles. There were times when I questioned whether it was worth it, but then he remembered the 22 families, of the children who would now have a fair chance, of the system that, for the first time in decades, had real oversight. The best revenge was not to make Mrs. Whitmore suffer. It was to ensure that what she did could no longer be done so easily, so with impunity. It was transforming pain into politics, personal injustice into collective change. Marcus had entered that school as a concerned father. He left having catalyzed reform that would protect thousands of children. Sophie would bear not the scar of being diminished, but the knowledge that when the world tried to make her doubt, her father, and a community, had stood up. No, she matters. That was the lesson no curriculum could teach. You have inherent value, and when systems try to deny it, there are tools to fight back, not with anger, but with surgical precision. True justice is not explosive, it's meticulous. It does not end when the guilty party is punished. It ends when the system that allowed the damage is rebuilt. Marcus parked and watched Sophie jump out of the car, chattering away about her next project. She was herself again, brilliant, confident, unstoppable, and somewhere, in rooms across the country, other Sophies would have a better chance, thanks to the day a father refused to accept that his daughter's suffering was inevitable. If this story of transforming injustice into systemic change touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the best stories aren't about revenge. They're about people who refuse to accept this is how things are, and decide they can be different. Marcus Chen just tried to defend Sophie, but ended up defending thousands of children. He learned that true justice is not about repaying the harm suffered. It is about achieving the transformation that his oppressors could never have imagined possible. Mrs. Whitmore tried to break a 7-year-old child, but ended up catalyzing a national movement that would redefine how schools treat all children, regardless of the color of their skin.